would say that, or a number of people said it's the worst idea that ever worked. Or at least I can say everyone at the time seemed to say it was the worst idea ever, and it worked, so maybe that's the nice connection. It's the worst idea that ever worked. I'm different than most technology founders insofar that I actually went to art school. So I was an artist by training. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and if you guys know that school, and I studied industrial design. And industrial design, I know they teach that here in Stanford. It's kind of like product design, everything from a toothbrush to a spaceship, they used to say, and everything in between. Bless you. And growing up, you don't get rewarded for being disruptive. You just go to the principal's office, and I was there quite often. Guys at RISD and teachers were like, you're a designer. You can redesign everything around you. You can, basically they're saying is you can change the world.
The idea. The all-important idea. Every startup journey begins with one, and yet the start to this journey was a little different than most. Whilst hatching every crazy idea under the sun just to help them pay the rent, Brian and his roommate Joe realized that there's a business conference coming to town this weekend.
What if we just created a bed and breakfast for the design conference? Naturally, that's maybe not what most people think to do, but that's what we thought to do.
The only problem, they had no beds. What were they to do? Offer just breakfast? Luckily, Joe had been camping and had airbeds on hand, and so the name theairbedandbreakfast.com was born. Their opening weekend, they hosted 3 people from around the world, one from Boston, one from Utah, and the third from India. Their guests were treated to a small airbed on the floor and a breakfast in the morning. Far from luxury 5-star hotel. However, Joe and Brian soon realized that living with their guests for the entirety of the weekend contracted the arcs of year-long friendships into just a few days. In the midst of this crazy weekend, Joe and Brian realized that there was a bigger idea here. Yes, they were providing the essentials of shelter and food, but they were also offering something much greater than that. They were offering their customers a different type of necessity: community. And so, with nothing more than an idea and a dream, the journey began. For 4 consecutive weekends of national conventions, the business had only managed a handful of bookings. When there was no convention in town, they got no bookings at all. If only there were political conventions every weekend, they'd have a business. But they had nothing.
We're one of the companies that launched a bunch of times. I actually learned something, because we kept doing launches to get a lot of press. If you launch and no one notices, you can actually just keep launching.
And that they did. However, this tactic wasn't cheap. They were burning cash and needed an injection quick. So, following the trend of not following trends, Joe and Brian thought,
late at night, it's midnight, when you 1 in the morning, Joe and I think, maybe we're airbed and breakfast. The airbeds aren't working out. Maybe we can sell breakfast. Everyone needs to eat.
The presidential-themed cereal was sold at $40 a pop. That's right, $40 for a box of cereal. However, the limited edition Obama O's and Captain McCain's completely sold out. After paying the royalty, they had made $30,000, which was enough to save the company and keep them adrift. For now. After a few months, they'd blitzed through the cash injection and were almost dead broke. Again. Nearly 2 years in, with national press but 0 customers, the co-founders wondered what they were going to do. They were on the brink of death, with no viable options to save them. It appeared that they had met their inevitable demise. Everyone that doubted them was right. Until a mutual friend suggested they try Y Combinator, a lifeline. And it's at Y Combinator that they received a series of advice that would change their business forever.
probably the most important single piece of advice I got, which is probably advice that is probably the most important advice I can give you, or one of the most important advice, is he basically drew out this chart. He basically said, it's better to have 100 people that love you, 100 customers that love you, than 1 million customers that just sort of like you. In other words, if you have 100 people that absolutely love your product, they'll tell 100 people, and then they'll tell 100 people, or even 10 people, and this thing will grow. We call it growing virally. In fact, almost all movements in history have grown this way as well.
They took the first flight to New York and went door to door meeting all of their hosts in an attempt to understand them and their problems. They soon realized that the homes they hosted were amazing, but the pictures on Airbnb were not. So again, under the darkness of night, they came up with an idea.
But what if you just clicked a button and a photographer next day would magically show up and photograph your home? And they thought that'd be amazing. And so I went home with Joe, and we borrowed a camera from one of our friends in Brooklyn, who was a photographer, and we knocked on the door. And they're like, hello, yes, I'm here, the photographer. And they're like, wow, this is a small company. The founder's also photographing my home.
Hosts loved the complimentary service, and over time began to love Airbnb. And by April 2009, they had reached their goal of getting 100 people that loved them. In fact, they had more than 100. They had thousands. People started booking, and it soon became clear there was a real business to be made. Y Combinator and Paul Graham may have been the single biggest boost in the growth of Airbnb. Going into the 2008 winter batch, Brian and Joe had very little, if anything, to show for the past year and a half. The only reason they were accepted was because Paul Graham guessed that if they managed to persuade 1,000 people to buy $40 cereal, they might just be able to persuade a few more about this crazy house-sharing idea. The end goal was to get investment. Demo Day was when the companies at Y Combinator present to investors. And with less than a month left, Joe and Brian decided to spend every single waking hour working on Airbnb. Not a single second was spared on anything else, and soon they found themselves in a real rhythm and momentum. By the time Demo Day came, there were 0 investors. Just a year after the financial crisis, lending had dried up, and VCs were scared to invest in risky startups. Without this investment, the company was sure to die, with no hope of resurrection. However, in the final hour, Brian met with a man from Sequoia Capital. They'd only previously invested in the likes of Google, LinkedIn, and PayPal. Brian opened the email, and to his surprise, the notorious VC firm had decided to invest $585,000 in return for 25%, valuing the roommate's little bootstrapped startup at over $2.4 million. And from then on, the rest is history.
Public today in one of the most anticipated IPOs of the year. Company priced its IPO at $68 a share. That's much higher than the original range established earlier in the week. It brings the valuation to $47 billion.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave it a like. We're going to be delivering lots more entrepreneurial, motivational, and business-based videos. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.